What Isabella Rodriguez was about to uncover beneath an ancient pecan tree on her great-aunt's Georgia farm that had stood untouched since 1863 would expose a Confederate treasury mystery and transform her life in ways she'd never dared to imagine. Before we dive in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story inspires you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something absolutely extraordinary waiting for you. The cracked linoleum floor of the Charlotte VA clinic. Waiting room reflected the harsh overhead lighting as Isabella Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, clutching yet another stack of medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than her ability to pay them. At 29, this former Army medic had survived 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the invisible wounds she'd brought home were proving harder to defeat than any enemy she'd faced in combat. Isabella's efficiency apartment in a deteriorating complex near Charlotte's airport had become her carefully constructed fortress. Against a world that felt perpetually dangerous, the single room, barely 400 square feet, contained the remnants of what had once been a promising life. A Murphy bed that folded into the wall, a small kitchenette dominated by prescription bottles instead of food, and a desk where she studied online veterinary technician courses during her sleepless nights. The apartment's windows remained covered by heavy blackout curtains year-round. It's not just for sleep, but to control the hypervigilance that made every shadow a potential threat. Sound-dampening foam panels purchased with money she couldn't afford to spend lined the walls to muffle the aircraft noise that invariably triggered memories of helicopter evacuations and incoming mortars. Her neighbors probably thought she was paranoid, but they had no idea how much effort it took just to exist in civilian spaces that felt chaotic and unpredictable. Isabella's morning routine had evolved into a complex 2-hour ritual that would have impressed her old drill sergeant with its precision. First came the medication schedule, anxiety management, sleep regulation, and pain control for the chronic headaches that had plagued her since the IED explosion that ended her military career. Then the mental preparation exercises her VA therapist had taught her grounding techniques, breathing patterns, and cognitive strategies for managing the hyperarousal that made simple tasks like grocery shopping feel like combat missions. Her smartphone contained more medical appointment reminders than personal contacts, a digital monument to how thoroughly PTSD had isolated her from the social connections that most people took for granted. Dr. Martinez at the VA had explained that this isolation was common among combat veterans, but understanding the psychology didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. The worst part wasn't the nightmares or the panic attacks, or even the constant vigilance that exhausted her before each day truly began. The worst part was the financial quicksand that threatened to swallow her completely. Even with her VA disability, payments, the additional costs of managing severe PTSD, consumed nearly 45% of her monthly income. Co-payments for specialized therapy sessions, emergency room visits during particularly severe episodes, and the frequent adjustments to medications that weren't fully covered by her benefits had created a mountain of debt that grew larger despite her best efforts to pay it down. Isabella worked part-time at a 24-hour veterinary emergency clinic, one of the few jobs she'd found that accommodated both her need for flexible scheduling around medical appointments and her comfort with working nights when there were fewer people around. The work provided some purpose. Helping injured animals gave her a sense of usefulness that had been missing since her medical discharge, but the pay barely covered rent, let alone the accumulating medical expenses. Her marriage to Marcus Rodriguez had been one of the casualties of her invisible war. They'd met during her first deployment, both young soldiers convinced that love could conquer anything, and Marcus had been patient initially, learning about PTSD symptoms and attending couples therapy sessions designed to help military families navigate the challenges of reintegration. But 18 months of unpredictable episodes, mounting medical bills, Isabella's increasing inability to engage in normal social activities had gradually worn down his resilience. The breaking point had come during what was supposed to be a romantic dinner for their 3rd wedding anniversary. When a car backfired in the restaurant parking lot, Isabella had instinctively dropped to the floor, pulling Marcus down with her as she scanned for cover and escape routes. The other diners had stared as Marcus helped her up, his face a mixture of concern and embarrassment that Isabella would never forget. That night, he'd admitted that he felt like he was losing the woman he'd fallen in love with, watching her disappear into a version of herself he didn't know how to reach. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, taking with it not just emotional support, but also the shared financial responsibilities that had made survival marginally easier. Marcus had been fair about the settlement, but fair didn't change the reality that Isabella was now facing her battles entirely alone. With only her VA benefits and part-time veterinary work to sustain her, the stack of bills on her kitchen counter told the story of her financial desperation with mathematical precision. Past due notices from 3 different psychiatric specialists who provided services beyond basic VA coverage. A final warning from her landlord about late rent that threatened eviction within 30 days. Estimates from bankruptcy attorneys she'd been researching as her absolute last resort, knowing that such a drastic step would complicate her future in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. Isabella had been comparing prices for moving into an even cheaper apartment, probably outside Charlotte where her medical support network was established. When the certified letter arrived from Pemberton and Associates legal firm, the thick cream-colored envelope stood out dramatically among the collection notices and medical correspondence that usually filled her mailbox. The law firm's letterhead featured an address in Savannah, Georgia, a city Isabella remembered visiting once during a childhood vacation. Her grandmother had occasionally mentioned having relatives in Georgia, but those family connections had become increasingly vague as older generations passed away and geographic distances made maintaining relationships difficult. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, the formal correspondence began. We regret to inform you of the passing of your great-aunt, Esperanza Delacroix. On April 22nd, as the sole beneficiary designated in her last will and testament, you have inherited her estate. At 4,821 Magnolia Grove Road, Savannah, Georgia, historically known as Casa Esperanza, including all buildings, land, personal property, and assets contained therein. Isabella read the letter 4 times before the words began to register as reality rather than some elaborate mistake. Great-Aunt Esperanza, her grandmother's enigmatic older sister, who had occupied the margins of family stories for as long as Isabella could remember. She was the subject of whispered conversations that stopped when children entered the room. The mysterious relative who sent beautifully crafted Christmas cards from Georgia, but never appeared at family gatherings or holiday celebrations. Family. Speculation about Esperanza's lifestyle had provided endless material for gossip during extended family reunions. Some relatives whispered about her connections to historical societies and wealthy collectors in Savannah's antique district. Others suggested involvement in artifact trading that might not bear close legal scrutiny. The expensive gifts she occasionally sent Civil War-era jewelry for the women. Authentic military memorabilia for the men seemed far beyond what a single woman living alone should be able to afford. Isabella's most vivid memory of Great-Aunt Esperanza dated to her high school graduation ceremony 6 years earlier, just before her military enlistment. Esperanza had appeared unexpectedly at the graduation, dressed in an elegant vintage dress that looked like it belonged in a historical film, standing out among the other family members in their modern formal attire. Her presence had caused considerable excitement among relatives who hadn't seen her in several years. After the official ceremony, Esperanza had approached Isabella privately, drawing her away from the extended family group that was preparing for the traditional celebration dinner. Her manner had been both warm and intensely serious, as if she were imparting information of critical importance that would only be understood years later. "Mia," she had said, using the Spanish endearment in her refined Southern accent that somehow incorporated both her Hispanic heritage and her decades in Georgia. "You're choosing a path now that will ask everything of you. Life is going to present you with battles that will test not just your courage, but your very soul." She had pressed a small, elegantly wrapped package into Isabella's hands with the ceremony of someone passing down a sacred family tradition. "This is for when those battles feel impossible to survive. Always remember that the most valuable treasures are often buried beneath layers of pain and struggle, waiting for someone persistent enough to dig through the darkness to find their true worth." Inside the package had been an ornate silver locket surface decorated with intricate engravings of magnolia blossoms, and what Isabella later learned were Confederate military insignia. The inscription on the back read in elegant script, "Strength grows in hidden places, E.D." Isabella had treasured the locket throughout her military service, wearing it during all 3 deployments as a talisman of family connection and feminine strength in the male-dominated world of combat medicine. However, during the darkest period, after her medical discharge, when PTSD symptoms had left her unable to work for 6 months and facing immediate eviction, Isabella had reluctantly taken the locket to an antique jewelry dealer in Charlotte's historic district. The proprietor had examined it carefully before offering $580, describing it as a beautiful example of Civil War-era jewelry, probably commissioned by a wealthy Confederate family. Isabella had accepted the money without negotiation, using it to cover rent while promising herself she would somehow find a way to buy back Esperanza's precious gift. That promise remained unfulfilled 2 years later. Adding another layer of guilt to the complex emotions surrounding her family relationships, she had sold the one tangible connection to the mysterious great-aunt who had somehow seen potential in a teenage girl about to join the military. Now, staring at this inheritance letter, Isabella felt a complicated mixture of emotions that her therapy training had taught her to recognize, but not necessarily resolve. Guilt over selling Esperanza's meaningful gift competed with desperate hope that this unexpected inheritance might represent an escape from the relentless cycle of financial crisis and medical struggles that had defined her civilian existence. A plantation in Georgia, something she knew absolutely nothing about managing despite her growing interest in animal care in a city that existed primarily in tourist postcards and childhood vacation memories. The lawyer's letter provided minimal details but mentioned several intriguing elements that captured Isabella's attention despite her natural wariness about things that seemed too good to be true. The property had been unoccupied since Esperanza's hospitalization in February, was described as historically significant with potential educational value, and contained substantial collections of artifacts and research materials that might have considerable worth to collectors and museums. The phrase "substantial collections of artifacts" sparked Isabella's curiosity about what kind of historical materials a rural Georgia plantation might contain beyond the expected antique furniture and family heirlooms. Could this be connected to the expensive gifts Esperanza had sent over the years, suggesting access to valuable Civil War memorabilia or other historical items? The practical challenges seemed overwhelming when Isabella began to consider them seriously. Her PTSD treatment had taken 2 years to optimize with Dr. Martinez, her VA psychiatrist, finally achieving a medication and therapy protocol that kept her symptoms manageable most days. The Charlotte medical community understood her case history, had established emergency protocols that could mean the difference between a manageable episode and a life-threatening crisis, and provided the kind of specialized care that might not be available in smaller communities. Moving would mean rebuilding her entire support network from scratch, finding new doctors who understood combat PTSD in women, establishing relationships with emergency services, and hoping that Georgia's VA system could provide continuity of care without dangerous gaps in treatment. Her support group at the Charlotte VA, modest as it was, represented years of careful relationship building with other female veterans who understood the unique challenges of military sexual trauma combined with combat PTSD. Yet when Isabella honestly assessed her current trajectory, the facts were undeniable and increasingly desperate. Her apartment building was being converted to condominiums with existing tenants required to move within 90 days. Her part-time veterinary job was becoming increasingly stressful as management cut costs by reducing staff while expecting remaining employees to handle larger caseloads. Her modest savings, accumulated through extreme frugality, would cover perhaps 6 weeks of expenses if she lost her current position. Despite her progress in therapy, Isabella remained just one medical emergency or employment disruption away from homelessness, a situation that affected female veterans at disproportionately high rates despite their service and sacrifice. Inheritance offered something that had become increasingly rare in her life: options and possibilities rather than just survival strategies. Isabella's research into Savannah revealed a city with a complex relationship to its Civil War history, but also a community that had developed comprehensive services for veterans, including several programs specifically designed to support women transitioning from military to civilian life. The cost of living appeared significantly lower than Charlotte, potentially allowing Isabella to survive on reduced income while exploring opportunities to develop new skills or find more suitable employment. Most encouragingly, she discovered that Georgia had recently established a pilot program connecting veterans with agricultural and animal care opportunities in rural areas. Recognizing that many former service members found healing through working with land and animals rather than traditional urban employment, the program included specialized mental health services, vocational training, community integration initiatives designed specifically for veterans struggling with reintegration challenges. "I think I should at least look at the place," Isabella said aloud to her empty apartment, the decision crystallizing as she reviewed the information about Savannah and the potential opportunities available to her in Georgia. Her current path offered little hope for meaningful improvement, while the inheritance at least provided the possibility of a fresh start in an environment that might be better suited to her recovery needs. Even if managing a plantation proved impossible, the property would provide breathing room to develop a more sustainable plan and the option to sell if necessary. For the first time in months, Isabella allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond mere survival. Though her military training and PTSD experience had taught her to be cautiously optimistic about any situation that appeared too good to be true, Isabella submitted her 2 weeks' notice at the veterinary clinic, explaining to Dr. Patterson that a family matter required her immediate relocation to Georgia. She researched moving companies that specialized in long-distance relocations, spoke with her doctors about transferring medical records and establishing care in Savannah, and began the complex process of notifying her VA service coordinators and the few remaining friends about her upcoming departure from North Carolina. The preparation process revealed just how much her life had been constrained by her medical and psychological needs. Every decision required careful consideration of medication schedules, trigger management, emergency mental health access during the journey, and ensuring continuity of care in her new location. The logistics of managing PTSD during a major life transition required the kind of detailed planning that reminded Isabella of military operations. Though the stakes felt even more personal and immediate, Isabella contacted Dr. Martinez's office to arrange for comprehensive medical records that could be forwarded to new healthcare providers, temporary prescription refills to cover the transition period, and detailed documentation of her treatment. History that would help Georgia doctors understand her specific needs without requiring her to retell traumatic experiences unnecessarily. On a humid April morning that felt like summer despite the calendar, Isabella loaded her essential possessions into a rental truck she could barely afford, carefully securing her medications and therapy materials in a specially organized container, designed for safe transport. The drive from Charlotte to Savannah would take approximately 5 hours, requiring careful planning for rest breaks, anxiety management, and emergency preparedness in case she experienced episodes during the journey. As she departed Charlotte, Isabella felt the familiar mixture of apprehension and hope that had become her constant companion since her military discharge. The city had been both prison and refuge, providing essential medical resources while trapping her in financial desperation and social isolation. She was trading familiar struggles for unknown possibilities, a gamble that would either advance her recovery or complicate it beyond her ability to manage. "I'm actually doing this," Isabella said as she crossed into South Carolina, her voice filled with the cautious optimism that she allowed herself only in small, carefully measured doses since returning from combat. Abuela always said Esperanza had more wisdom than people gave her credit for. Maybe she knew I needed a change exactly when I needed it most. Neither Isabella nor anyone in her family could have imagined that beneath an ancient pecan tree marked on a hand-drawn map in Esperanza's study, buried in a weatherproof Confederate treasury chest that hadn't been disturbed since 1863, lay gold coins and precious artifacts worth $30 million, hidden in plain sight, as Esperanza had always hinted in her mysterious letters, waited the key to transforming Isabella's life in ways that would exceed her wildest dreams and test everything she believed about courage, heritage, and the true meaning of family legacy. The drive through Georgia's diverse landscape provided Isabella with unexpected moments of tranquility that she hadn't experienced since before her first deployment. The transition from North Carolina's rolling hills to Georgia's coastal plains created a visual rhythm that seemed to calm her hypervigilance in ways her medication rarely achieved. Spanish moss draping from ancient oak trees created natural curtains that filtered the harsh sunlight, while the increasing humidity carried scents of magnolia and jasmine that triggered positive childhood memories rather than combat flashbacks. For a veteran whose nervous system had been permanently altered by repeated exposure to life-threatening situations, every mile away from Charlotte represented another step into the unknown. What if she experienced a severe dissociative episode in an unfamiliar place? What if the local medical facilities weren't equipped to handle complex combat-related PTSD? What if this impulsive decision to abandon her carefully constructed support system proved to be a catastrophic mistake that left her more vulnerable than ever? Yet despite the long drive and the disruption to her normally rigid routine, Isabella found herself experiencing brief moments of unexpected calm as the urban sprawl gradually gave way to rural communities and agricultural land. She had prepared meticulously for the journey. Her medications organized in a 7-day pill organizer, her therapy workbooks and coping tools arranged in a backpack designed for emergency mental health management, and a carefully curated playlist of music that Dr. Martinez had helped her identify as grounding rather than triggering. Every 2 hours, she pulled into rest areas to practice the progressive muscle relaxation techniques her VA therapist had taught her. Reset her mental state using breathing exercises specifically designed for anxiety management, and check her physical responses for early warning signs that might indicate an approaching panic attack. The routine provided structure and predictability during a time when everything else felt chaotic and uncertain. "Look at that," Isabella murmured, as she crested a hill and savanna spread out before her in the distance. "It looks like something from a postcard." The view is genuinely striking, a historic city nestled among massive trees draped with Spanish moss, with church spires and antebellum architecture creating a skyline that spoke of deep historical roots and southern elegance. The immediate impression was of a community that had successfully balanced preservation of its past with accommodation of modern needs. Unlike many rural areas she had passed through during her journey, Savannah showed clear signs of economic vitality and cultural sophistication. The historic district appeared well-maintained, with tourism and education provided. "I'm actually doing this," Isabella said, as she crossed into South Carolina, her voice filled with the cautious optimism that she allowed herself only in small, carefully measured doses since returning from combat. Abuela always said Esperanza had more wisdom than people gave her credit for. Maybe she knew I needed a change exactly when I needed it most. Neither Isabella nor anyone in her family could have imagined that beneath an ancient pecan tree marked on a hand-drawn map in Esperanza's study, buried in a weatherproof Confederate treasury chest that hadn't been disturbed since 1863, lay gold coins and precious artifacts worth $30 million, hidden in plain sight, as Esperanza had always hinted in her mysterious letters, waited the key to transforming Isabella's life in ways that would exceed her wildest dreams and test everything she believed about courage, heritage, and the true meaning of family legacy. The drive through Georgia's diverse landscape provided Isabella with unexpected moments of tranquility that she hadn't experienced since before her first deployment. The transition from North Carolina's rolling hills to Georgia's coastal plains created a visual rhythm that seemed to calm her hypervigilance in ways her medication rarely achieved. Spanish moss draping from ancient oak trees created natural curtains that filtered the harsh sunlight, while the increasing humidity carried scents of magnolia and jasmine that triggered positive childhood memories rather than combat flashbacks. For a veteran whose nervous system had been permanently altered by repeated exposure to life-threatening situations, every mile away from Charlotte represented another step into the unknown. What if she experienced a severe dissociative episode in an unfamiliar place? What if the local medical facilities weren't equipped to handle complex combat-related PTSD? What if this impulsive decision to abandon her carefully constructed support system proved to be a catastrophic mistake that left her more vulnerable than ever? Yet despite the long drive and the disruption to her normally rigid routine, Isabella found herself experiencing brief moments of unexpected calm as the urban sprawl gradually gave way to rural communities and agricultural land. She had prepared meticulously for the journey. Her medications organized in a 7-day pill organizer. Her therapy workbooks and coping tools arranged in a backpack designed for emergency mental health management. And a carefully curated playlist of music that Dr. Martinez had helped her identify as grounding rather than triggering. Every 2 hours, she pulled into rest areas to practice the progressive muscle relaxation techniques her VA therapist had taught her. Reset her mental state using breathing exercises specifically designed for anxiety management, and check her physical responses for early warning signs that might indicate an approaching panic attack. The routine provided structure and predictability during a time when everything else felt chaotic and uncertain. "Look at that," Isabella murmured, as she crested a hill and savanna spread out before her in the distance. "It looks like something from a postcard." The view is genuinely striking, a historic city nestled among massive trees draped with Spanish moss, with church spires and antebellum architecture creating a skyline that spoke of deep historical roots and southern elegance. The immediate impression was of a community that had successfully balanced preservation of its past with accommodation of modern needs. Unlike many rural areas she had passed through during her journey, Savannah showed clear signs of economic vitality and cultural sophistication. The historic district appeared well maintained, with tourism and education providing sustainable economic foundations that had preserved rather than abandoned the city's architectural heritage. The directions from Pemberton and Associates led Isabella along increasingly narrow country roads, lined with massive oak trees and glimpses of antebellum estates that had somehow survived the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the economic changes of the intervening century and a half. She passed several properties that had been converted into museums or event venues, suggesting a community that understood how to monetize historical significance while maintaining authenticity. Finally, she turned onto a gravel driveway marked by an elegant wrought iron gate bearing the name Casa Esperanza Est, 1847. The quarter-mile drive wound through a grove of ancient pecan trees before opening onto a clearing that contained one of the most beautiful properties Isabella had ever seen. The main house was a stunning example of antebellum plantation architecture, a 2-story Greek Revival mansion with massive white columns supporting a wraparound veranda on both levels. Enormous magnolia trees provided natural air conditioning, while carefully maintained gardens suggested that someone had been caring for the property despite Esperanza's hospitalization. Several outbuildings in various states of repair dotted the landscape, including what appeared to be original slave quarters that had been converted to storage buildings, a reminder of the property's complex historical legacy. Isabella parked her rental truck in front of the main house and sat for several minutes, practicing the deep breathing techniques she had learned before stepping out into the humid Georgia afternoon. The mansion was even more impressive up close, with original architectural details that had been carefully maintained and modern, amenities seamlessly integrated without compromising the historical integrity. She approached the front door cautiously, still half expecting to wake from what increasingly felt like an elaborate dream. Using the ornate brass key provided by the law firm, she unlocked the heavy wooden door with its original stained glass panels and stepped into the dimly lit entrance hall of what was now, improbably, her home. The interior of Casa Esperanza revealed Great Aunt Esperanza's sophisticated taste and deep appreciation for historical authenticity. The formal parlor and dining room contained museum-quality period furniture that appeared to date from the mid-19th century, arranged as if waiting for guests from that distant era. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, and oil paintings of unknown ancestors created an atmosphere of Luna pushed past Isabella as she opened the front door, bounding down the veranda steps to greet the visitor with obvious affection. "Down, Luna," the woman said with practiced authority, balancing the casserole dish while accepting the dog's enthusiastic welcome. "I know you're excited to see people again, but let me get through the door first." She looked up as Isabella appeared on the veranda, offering a warm smile that immediately put her more at ease than she had expected. "You must be Isabella," the woman said, extending her free hand in greeting. "I'm Catherine Mitchell, Dr. Catherine Mitchell. I run the veterinary practice here in town, and I've been looking after Luna since Esperanza went into the hospital." The introduction to someone who had known and cared for both Esperanza and Luna provided Isabella with an immediate sense of connection to her new community. "Yes, I'm Isabella Rodriguez. I have to admit, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed by all of this. I had no idea Esperanza even had a dog, let alone that she'd left me this incredible property." Catherine's expression showed understanding and sympathy, without the excessive pity that often made Isabella uncomfortable. "Of course you're overwhelmed, honey. Inheriting a historical plantation you've never seen in a town you barely know would be overwhelming for anyone, but especially someone dealing with the challenges you faced." This revelation that Catherine somehow knew about Isabella's circumstances surprised her significantly. She had assumed that her personal situation was unknown to anyone in Savannah, creating privacy that might be both liberating and isolating. "You know about my situation?" Isabella asked carefully. "Esperanza kept track of family members she cared about more than most people realized," Catherine explained, shifting the casserole dish to offer it to Isabella. "She knew about your military service, your medical discharge, your struggles with PTSD and financial difficulties. She was deeply concerned about your welfare, but didn't want to interfere unless you truly needed help." The knowledge that Esperanza had been quietly aware of and concerned about her struggles, while Isabella had been feeling abandoned by extended family, created a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude for the unexpected care competed with confusion about why Esperanza had never reached out directly during the darkest periods of her recovery. "She did?" Isabella said, accepting the casserole dish, which smelled wonderfully of home-cooked Southern comfort food. "I thought she had completely lost touch with our family. Haven't heard from her since I was in high school." "Oh no," Catherine said, shaking her head emphatically. "Esperanza had her ways of staying informed about family members who mattered to her. She knew about your deployments, your injuries, your divorce, your financial struggles. She was very worried about you, but she believed in allowing people their dignity and independence unless they truly needed intervention." This new perspective on Esperanza's apparent absence from her life reframed years of assumptions about family indifference and abandonment. While Isabella had been struggling alone with recovery, feeling forgotten by relatives who seemed uninterested in her challenges, Esperanza had been quietly monitoring her situation and apparently preparing some form of assistance. "Actually, a newer addition to Esperanza's life," Catherine continued, gesturing toward the dog who was now sitting politely beside them, looking back and forth between the two women as if following their conversation. "She adopted her from our animal rescue about 3 years ago. Specifically requested a dog with therapy training who had worked with veterans dealing with PTSD, said she wanted to learn more about how to help someone she cared about if the opportunity ever arose." The thoughtfulness and foresight of Esperanza's decision to adopt and train Luna specifically for Isabella's potential needs brought tears to her eyes. While she had been viewing this inheritance as a desperate last resort, Esperanza had apparently been creating a carefully planned refuge designed specifically for her recovery needs. "There's more," Catherine said gently, as if recognizing that Isabella needed time to process each revelation before receiving additional information. "Esperanza left detailed instructions with several of us about helping you get settled and established here. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Savannah Veterans Medical Center has been expecting you and reviewing your case history. And Professor Jonathan Whitmore at the Savannah College of Art and Design has been working with Esperanza on some historical research projects that she specifically wanted to share with you." The revelation that Esperanza had been orchestrating a comprehensive support system for months, or possibly years before her death, transformed Isabella's understanding of the inheritance entirely. This wasn't a random gesture of family obligation or a simple property transfer. It was a carefully constructed rescue operation designed to address her specific needs, challenges, and interests. "But why didn't she contact me directly?" Isabella asked, voicing the question that had been building since learning about Esperanza's awareness of her situation. "Why go through all this preparation without letting me know she was trying to help?" Catherine's expression became thoughtful, as if she had anticipated this question and had given considerable thought to the answer.
Esperanza understood pride, particularly the kind of pride that comes from military service and personal independence.
She knew that if she had simply offered to solve your problems with money or direct assistance, you might have refused out of a sense of obligation or concern about becoming dependent on family charity. The wisdom of Esperanza's indirect approach became clear to Isabella as she considered her own psychology and typical responses to offers of help. Throughout her recovery, she had consistently resisted direct assistance, viewing it as pity rather than support, a common response among veterans who had once been physically and mentally capable of handling any challenge. This way, Catherine continued, she could provide help that looked like opportunity rather than charity. An inheritance carries different psychological implications than a gift or loan. It represents something you've earned through family connection rather than something given out of sympathy for your circumstances. Come inside, Isabella said after a moment, finding her social instincts emerging despite her discomfort with unexpected interactions. I just arrived and haven't even had a chance to look around properly, but you clearly know this place better than I do. Catherine followed Isabella into the house with Luna trotting contentedly beside them, immediately beginning to provide helpful information about the properties, systems, and history. Esperanza renovated the entire place about 7 years ago. She explained as they moved through the elegant rooms. She made sure all the modern systems were updated and efficient, while preserving every possible historical detail. She was absolutely meticulous about maintaining both the practical functionality and the historical authenticity. The kitchen was a perfect example of this careful balance. State-of-the-art appliances and modern conveniences seamlessly integrated into cabinetry and design, elements that could have been original to the 1840s. Isabella opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator to find it recently stocked with basic necessities, another thoughtful preparation for her arrival. The property is about 150 acres total. Catherine continued as they settled at the kitchen table with sweet tea that she helped prepare. About 60 acres in productive farmland currently leased to the Henderson family next door, who've been maintaining the agricultural operations, another 40 acres in woodlands that provide both privacy and timber income, and the rest in pasture, gardens, and the homestead area. As they talked, Catherine provided Isabella with a comprehensive overview of community resources available to her, particularly those relevant to her status as a veteran and her interest in animal care. The information aligned with her preliminary research, but hearing it from someone with direct knowledge of local services made them seem more accessible and real. I should let you get settled, Catherine said after they had finished their tea and preliminary property orientation. But before I go, Esperanza left something specific for you in her study. She said you should find it as soon as you arrived. She pointed toward an elegant doorway off the main hallway. Second floor, first door on the right. Can't miss it. After Catherine departed with promises to return the following day with additional information about local resources, Isabella stood in the quiet house, overwhelmed by the magnitude of discovery she had experienced in just a few hours. Luna sat beside her, looking up with the patient understanding that seemed characteristic of animals who had worked with trauma survivors. Let's go see what Esperanza left for us, Isabella said to her new companion, finding comfort in speaking aloud to the dog. Together, they climbed the elegant staircase to the second floor, their footsteps muffled by Persian runners that had probably been placed there decades ago. The study was exactly where Catherine had indicated, and opening the door revealed a room that immediately demonstrated Esperanza's passionate interest in history and research. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves contained hundreds of volumes on the Civil War, Southern history, genealogy, and archaeology. Display cases held carefully preserved artifacts, military buttons, uniform pieces, weapons, documents, each labeled with detailed information about its historical significance and provenance. A magnificent mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its leather inlaid, surface organized with the precision of someone who approached historical research as seriously as any academic endeavor. On top of the desk, positioned prominently where it couldn't be missed, sat an ornate wooden jewelry box with Isabella's name written on an attached card in Esperanza's distinctive handwriting. Isabella approached the desk cautiously, feeling as if she were intruding on her great-aunt's private workspace, despite now being the legal owner of everything in the room. The wooden box was crafted from what appeared to be antique mahogany, with mother-of-pearl inlay work that suggested considerable value and age. The card attached to the box contained a simple message in Spanish: Para mí, Sabrina Querida el Corazón encuentra su camino a casa. For my dear niece, the heart finds its way home. With hands that trembled slightly from emotion rather than anxiety, Isabella opened the box to find a familiar object nestled on a bed of ivory silk. The silver locket she had sold 2 years ago during her financial crisis. Somehow, Esperanza had tracked down the antique dealer in Charlotte, purchased the locket, and returned it to the family where it belonged. Beneath the locket lay an envelope addressed to Isabella in Esperanza's careful script. Inside was a handwritten letter that provided her first direct communication from her great-aunt since her high school graduation. Mi querida Isabella. The letter began in Esperanza's elegant handwriting that seamlessly blended Spanish and English in the way of someone truly bilingual. If you are reading this, it means you have decided to accept my gift and give Savannah a chance to become your home. I hope you understand that this inheritance represents far more than land and buildings. It is my attempt to provide you with the foundation for a life of purpose and healing rather than mere survival. By now, you have probably begun to realize that I have been more aware of your circumstances than you imagined. Please don't think of this awareness as intrusion or invasion of privacy. Rather, consider it the attention of a family member who has always admired your courage and determination, even from a distance. Your service to our country and your struggles with the invisible wounds that followed have demonstrated the kind of strength that I always hoped existed in our family bloodline. You have faced impossible situations with honor and have never allowed circumstances to diminish your fundamental compassion or your commitment to finding a path forward. This plantation has been my life's work for the past 30 years, but, more importantly, it has been my connection to a history that values sacrifice, resilience, and the capacity to rebuild after devastation. I believe you will find that Savannah and Casa Esperanza offer the kind of environment where true healing is possible and where you can build the future you deserve. The property comes with everything you need to succeed, including Luna's companionship, and a community that understands the real cost of service and sacrifice. More importantly, the plantation comes with secrets that will ensure your financial security for generations to come. Be patient, observant, and trust your instincts as you always have in dangerous situations. The most valuable treasures are often buried beneath the surface, waiting for someone persistent enough to uncover their true worth. Remember what I told you at your graduation? Strength grows in hidden places. With all my love and complete confidence in your future, Tia Esperanza beneath the signature was a postscript that caught Isabella's attention immediately. The locket has always pointed toward true treasure. In my desk drawer, you'll find a map that may be of particular interest. Our family has been guarding certain historical secrets since 1863, secrets that rightfully belong to you now. Isabella read the letter twice, feeling profound gratitude for Esperanza's thoughtfulness, combined with intense curiosity about the reference to secrets and valuable treasures hidden on the property. What could her great-aunt have discovered or preserved that would ensure financial security? Was she referring to the historical artifacts displayed throughout the study, investment accounts, or something else entirely? Following instructions, Isabella opened the desk's bottom drawer and found a rolled parchment, sealed with red wax, bearing an impression of what appeared to be a family crest. Breaking the seal carefully, she unrolled what appeared to be a hand-drawn map of the Casa Esperanza property, dated April 1863. The map showed the original boundaries of the plantation, including structures that no longer existed and landscape features that had changed over the intervening decades. Most significantly, it marked the location of an enormous pecan tree at the edge of sea. What had once been the main cotton field, with a symbol that resembled a compass rose and the notation CSA Treasury Colonel Miguel Santos. Across the bottom of the map, written in faded ink, was a message in Spanish. Para proteger de la agresión del norte preserver para la resurrección del ser. Acu. Isto permanisca, occulto, hasta QL. Honor exige su regreso. To protect from northern aggression and preserve for southern resurrection. May this remain hidden until honor demands its return? The reference to CSA, Confederate States of America, suggested something connected to Civil War history. Potentially valuable artifacts or documents that Esperanza had discovered during her historical research. Isabella's college courses had included enough American history to understand the significance of Confederate Treasury materials and the desperate measures taken by Southern officials to prevent valuable assets from being captured by Union forces as the war turned against the Confederacy. Some portions of the Confederate treasury had never been recovered, spawning countless treasure-hunting expeditions and historical mysteries that remained unsolved to this day. Could Esperanza have actually discovered Confederate gold or other treasury items buried on the plantation? The possibility seemed incredible. Yet her great-aunt's meticulous approach to historical research and the careful preservation of the map suggested this was more than wishful thinking or family legend. As evening approached, Isabella settled into the master bedroom that Catherine had prepared for her arrival, with Luna taking up residence on the Turkish rug beside the antique four-poster bed. Despite the comfortable surroundings and Luna's reassuring presence, her dreams were filled with fragments of military experiences interwoven with images of Civil War soldiers, burying treasure beneath moonlight, and her great-aunt working by lamplight over historical documents and maps. She woke several times, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds of the Georgia countryside and the absence of urban noise that had become her constant background soundtrack. But rather than the anxiety that usually accompanied disruptions to her sleep routine, Isabella found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine anticipation about what the morning might bring. The following morning dawned clear and humid, with golden sunlight filtering through the Spanish moss and creating dappled patterns across the plantation grounds. Isabella woke naturally for the first time in months, without the jarring intrusion of multiple alarm clocks or the immediate surge of anxiety that usually accompanied consciousness. Luna had remained beside the bed all night, her steady breathing providing a calming presence that seemed to regulate Isabella's own sleep patterns in ways her prescription medications rarely achieved. After completing her morning medication routine, an abbreviated version of her usual anxiety management exercises, Isabella found herself drawn to explore the property more thoroughly. The 1863 map she had discovered the previous evening had sparked her curiosity about the physical landscape and how it might have changed over the intervening century and a half. She dressed in practical clothing suitable for outdoor exploration. Cargo pants with multiple pockets for tools and supplies, a moisture-wicking t-shirt, and sturdy boots that could handle both cultivation and potentially rough terrain. Luna seemed to understand that an adventure was planned, staying close but alert as Isabella gathered a small backpack with water, her emergency medications, and a modern GPS device to complement Esperanza's historical map. The storage building behind the main house proved to contain far more than Isabella had expected from Catherine's brief mention the previous day. The converted outbuilding was organized with military precision, containing an impressive array of historical research equipment that clearly represented decades of serious archaeological investigation rather than casual hobby collecting. Professional-grade metal detection equipment occupied one wall, not the basic consumer devices Isabella had seen in television shows, but sophisticated instruments with digital readouts, multiple frequency settings, and specialized sensors designed for deep soil penetration. Detailed logbooks documented systematic surveys of the entire property with grid references, depth measurements, and careful notes about each significant discovery organized by date and location. Isabella opened one of the logbooks to find meticulous handwriting documenting years of methodical exploration. The entries revealed a scientific approach to a historical investigation that impressed Isabella with its thoroughness and attention to detail. Esperanza had apparently surveyed every acre of the 150-acre property multiple times, creating comprehensive maps of underground anomalies, metal signatures, and soil disturbances that might indicate historical significance. It's the most recent entries, dating from just months before Esperanza's hospitalization, focused increasingly on an area near what the historical map identified as the ancient pecan tree. The notes included technical specifications about metal density, depth measurements, and soil composition analysis that suggested something substantial, buried approximately 4 feet below the surface. Significant metallic signature detected at grid reference P7, depth 3.8 to 4.2 feet. Read 1 entry dated 6 months earlier. Dimensions suggest rectangular container, approximately 36 inches long, 24 inches wide. Density readings consistent with precious metals or substantial iron construction. Recommend professional archaeological consultation before excavation attempt. Another entry from 2 months later noted, ground-penetrating radar confirms large, buried object at P7 location. Shape and size consistent with military transport chest circa 1860s. Soil analysis indicates minimal disturbance since original burial. Historical documentation from Santos family letters supports Confederate treasury. Connection. The technical sophistication of Esperanza's research impressed Isabella and lent credibility to what might otherwise have seemed like wishful thinking or family legend. Her great-aunt had approached the investigation with scientific rigor rather than treasure hunter enthusiasm, building a compelling case for the presence of historically significant materials buried on the property. Isabella selected what appeared to be the primary metal detection unit, a device that looked more like sophisticated scientific equipment than recreational gear, and found an instruction manual that Esperanza had annotated with specific settings optimized for the plantation's soil conditions and the depth ranges most likely to contain Civil War-era artifacts. After familiarizing herself with the basic operations and safety protocols, Isabella gathered the equipment, clipped a leash to Luna's collar, and set out to locate the pecan tree marked on the historical map. The morning air was already warming with the promise of typical Georgia humidity, but the canopy of ancient trees provided natural air conditioning that made outdoor work comfortable. The pecan tree was unmistakable once Isabella located it, a massive specimen that must have been already matured during the Civil War, now grown to truly impressive dimensions. Its spreading canopy covered an area large enough to park several vehicles beneath, and its location at the edge of what had once been cultivated fields, but now served as pasture-made. It a natural landmark that would have been easily identifiable to anyone burying materials there, standing beneath the tree's massive branches with Luna exploring the immediate area. Isabella felt an unexpected connection to the generations of her family who had walked this same ground before her. From Colonel Santos, during the turbulent Civil War years, to Esperanza, with her passionate pursuit of historical truth, the continuity provided a sense of belonging that Isabella had rarely experienced since leaving military service. The metal detector proved remarkably sensitive once Isabella had configured it according to Esperanza's detailed instructions. Beginning with broad sweeps of the area surrounding the pecan tree, she immediately began registering signals from various small metal objects, nails, buttons, fragments of farm equipment that told the story of the property's long occupation and use. Isabella carefully logged each significant reading in a notebook she had brought. Following the methodical approach documented in Esperanza's research records, the process required patience and systematic coverage, but her military training had prepared her well for detailed, repetitive tasks that required sustained attention and careful record-keeping. After nearly 3 hours of increasingly precise searches, the metal detector emitted a tone that was distinctly different from the signals generated by smaller objects. The reading indicated a large, dense metallic mass approximately 4 feet below the surface, located directly beneath the northern edge of the pecan tree's root system. The position corresponded exactly with the location marked on Esperanza's 1863 map. Isabella's heart rate accelerated as she marked the spot with surveyor's flags from Esperanza's equipment collection. The metal detector's digital display showed readings consistent with Esperanza's documented findings. Substantial object with density characteristics, suggesting either precious metals or substantial iron construction. The indication was clear and strong. But the challenge of excavating beneath the roots of a century-old tree without damaging either the tree or whatever might be buried beneath it would require careful planning and possibly professional assistance. as she stood contemplating her discovery and the next steps required to investigate it properly. The sound of vehicles approaching along the plantation's driveway caught her attention. Luna's relaxed demeanor and enthusiastic tail wagging suggested the visitors were familiar and welcome. A behavioral cue that helped Isabella manage the hypervigilance that unexpected arrivals typically triggered. 2 vehicles parked near the main house. Catherine Mitchell's familiar pickup truck and a newer sedan with university parking decals visible on the rear window. Isabella gathered her equipment and returned to the house with Luna, her mind filled with questions about how to proceed with investigating what she had discovered. Catherine greeted her with the same warmth as the previous day, but today she was accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s, who carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to academic environments and intellectual discussion. Isabella, Catherine called as they approached across the lawn. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. This is Professor Jonathan Whitmore from the Savannah College of Art and Design. He was Esperanza's closest collaborator on her historical research projects, and I thought you'd want to meet him. Professor Whitmore moved with the careful deliberation of someone who spent most of his time in libraries and archives. But his eyes were sharp and observant, immediately noting the metal detection equipment Isabella had been using near the pecan. Tria's expression showed both intellectual curiosity and respectful appreciation for what he was seeing. You've been exploring Esperanza's research site, I see, the professor commented without preamble, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone with advanced education and Southern roots. She was convinced that location held the key to one of the most significant Civil War discoveries in Georgia. I'm Professor Whitmore. Jonathan and I worked with your great-aunt for nearly 15 years on various historical projects. Isabella found herself immediately comfortable with the professor's direct approach and obvious expertise. I've been reviewing her research notes and decided to verify her findings with the metal detector. The readings match her documentation. Exactly, and I've just confirmed a large metallic object at about 4 feet depth, right where her map indicated it should be. Professor Whitmore's expression showed both validation and excitement. Esperanza was absolutely meticulous in her research methodology. If anyone could have located something after all these years, it would have been her. I'm a historian emeritus from the college, specializing in Civil War economics and Confederate Treasury operations. Esperanza contacted me initially after discovering some Santos family letters that mentioned Treasury materials being diverted to this property during the Union advance on Savannah. The professor's academic credentials and long association with Esperanza lent additional credibility to the historical research, suggesting that the potential discovery might indeed be significant rather than merely wishful thinking or family legend. Do you believe there's actually Confederate gold buried here? Isabella asked directly, gesturing toward the pecan tree where she had been working. The documentary evidence is quite compelling, Professor Whitmore replied carefully, his academic training evident in his measured response. Historical records from the Confederate Treasury Department confirm that a significant shipment, approximately 400 pounds of gold coins and bullion, was diverted from the main Confederate Treasury evacuation during Sherman's 1864 march toward Savannah. Colonel Miguel Santos appears in military dispatches as being charged with securing these assets, and his family's private correspondence mentions Casa Esperanza as a secure location. The professor paused, consulting a leather portfolio he had brought with him. Esperanza and I spent years methodically eliminating every other possible location mentioned in Santos family documents. This property represents the only remaining site that matches the geographical and historical descriptions in the original correspondence. Catherine, who had been listening quietly to this historical discussion, added her own perspective from years of friendship with Esperanza. She became increasingly convinced during these last few years that she had finally located the burial site. She was actually planning a proper archaeological excavation in partnership with the State Historical Society, but her health declined before she could make those arrangements. This information provided Isabella with a potential path forward that would address both the practical challenges of excavation and the ethical considerations of handling historically significant artifacts. Professional archaeological involvement would ensure proper documentation and preservation while potentially validating the discovery's authenticity and value. Would the Historical Society still be interested in conducting a proper excavation? Isabella asked, thinking about the legal and logistical complexities involved in such an undertaking. Most certainly, Professor Whitmore replied with evident enthusiasm. In fact, I've maintained those academic connections specifically because of our ongoing research. The Georgia Historical Society has an archaeological team that specializes in Civil War sites. They could provide the expertise and equipment necessary for a proper recovery operation with full documentation and preservation protocols. What about legal ownership? Isabella asked, her practical concerns reflecting both her military training in following proper procedures and her personal need for financial security. Georgia state law is quite clear on this matter, the professor explained with the confidence of someone who had researched the legal questions thoroughly. As the property owner, any artifacts discovered on your land would legally belong to you. The Historical Society would request the opportunity to document, possibly display items of particular historical significance, but ownership and control remain with the property holder. The professor opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. Esperanza was quite thorough in researching these legal questions before proceeding with her investigation. These documents outlined the relevant state statutes, precedent cases, and proper procedures for handling significant historical discoveries. The conversation continued as they walked back toward the main house, with Professor Whitmore providing valuable context about the historical significance of Confederate Treasury materials and the academic interest that would surround any confirmed discovery. His extensive knowledge and obvious passion for historical accuracy reminded Isabella of Catherine's earlier descriptions of Esperanza's methodical approach to research. Over lunch prepared by Catherine, who seemed to have appointed herself Isabella's unofficial community integration coordinator, they discussed the practical next steps for investigating the site beneath the pecan tree. Professor Whitmore offered to contact the Georgia Historical Society to arrange for an archaeological assessment, while Catherine provided insights about local resources that might support such a project. Esperanza would be pleased to see her. Research continued with proper academic oversight, Professor Whitmore commented as they concluded their meal. She always intended for this discovery to benefit you personally, Isabella, but she also felt a strong responsibility to ensure that any historical materials were properly documented for future generations. The professor's words reinforced what Isabella had been learning about her great-aunt, that far from being a distant, Esperanza had been thoughtfully preparing a comprehensive support system designed specifically for Isabella's needs while also honoring her responsibilities as a historical researcher. There's something else you should know, Professor Whitmore continued, his expression becoming more personal. Esperanza spoke about you quite often during our research sessions, especially after she learned about your military service and subsequent struggles with PTSD. She had tremendous respect for your service and was deeply concerned about your recovery and long-term welfare. This revelation that Isabella had been frequently discussed and worried about by her great-aunt added another layer to her evolving understanding of family relationships and the inheritance she had received. Rather than being forgotten or dismissed by extended family, she had been the subject of ongoing concern and careful planning by someone who understood both her needs and her character. After the professor departed with promises to initiate contact with the archaeological team, Catherine remained behind to help Isabella understand more practical aspects of living at Casa Esperanza and integrating into the Savannah community. There's a farmer's market every Saturday morning in the historic district, Catherine mentioned as they walked through Esperanza's extensive gardens. It's a good place to meet local people and find the kind of organic produce that supports recovery and general health. Esperanza was a regular there for years. People knew and respected her. They spent the afternoon touring the outbuildings and learning about the property's various systems and resources. The converted slave quarters now served as storage for garden tools, seasonal equipment, and what appeared to be an extensive collection of historical artifacts that Esperanza had accumulated over the years. Legitimate purchases and archaeological discoveries. She was always very careful about provenance and legal acquisition. Catherine explained as they examined displays of Civil War-era items, uniform buttons, military equipment, personal items, documents, each carefully labeled. With information about its origins and historical context, everything here was either family property purchased through legitimate dealers or discovered during authorized archaeological work. The afternoon also included an introduction to the Henderson family, whose farm bordered Casa Esperanza and who had been managing the agricultural aspects of the property under lease agreement with Esperanza. David and Maria Henderson, along with their teenage son Carlos, had been operating the 60 acres of productive farmland for the past 5 years, sharing expenses and profits while maintaining the land in excellent condition. David Henderson, a man in his late 40s with the weathered hands and practical knowledge of someone who had spent his life working the soil, greeted Isabella with respectful friendliness and obvious curiosity about her plans for the property. "Miss Esperanza spoke highly of you," David said as they walked the boundaries between the two properties. "She mentioned you had military experience and were studying agricultural management. The land here is some of the best in this part of Georgia. Good soil, adequate water rights, and a growing season that allows for diverse crops." The agricultural discussion provided Isabella with insights into potential income sources from the property, while also connecting her to the rural community that would be her new neighbors. Maria Henderson, who managed the business aspects of their farming operation, proved to be knowledgeable about sustainable farming practices and local markets for organic produce. "We've been transitioning to organic certification over the past 3 years," Maria explained as they examined soil samples and crop rotation plans. "There's strong demand in Savannah for locally produced organic vegetables and herbs, particularly from the restaurant industry and the college community." Their teenage son Carlos showed particular interest in Isabella's military background and her studies in agricultural technology, questions about precision agriculture, sustainable pest management, and modern farming equipment suggested both intelligence and genuine interest in continuing the family farming tradition with improved methods. The professor's academic credentials and long association with Esperanza lent additional credibility to the historical research, suggesting that the potential discovery might indeed be significant rather than merely wishful thinking or family. "Legend, do you believe there's actually Confederate gold buried here?" Isabella asked directly, gesturing toward the pecan tree where she had been working. "The documentary evidence is quite compelling," Professor Whitmore replied carefully, his academic training evident in his measured response. "Historical records from the Confederate Treasury Department confirm that a significant shipment, approximately 400 pounds of gold coins and bullion, was diverted from the main Confederate Treasury evacuation during Sherman's 1864 march toward Savannah. Colonel Miguel Santos appears in military dispatches as being charged with securing these assets, and his family's private correspondence mentions Casa Esperanza as a secure location." The professor paused, consulting a leather portfolio he had brought with him. "Esperanza and I spent years methodically eliminating every other possible location mentioned in Santos' family documents. This property represents the only remaining site that matches the geographical and historical descriptions in the original correspondence." Catherine, who had been listening quietly to this historical discussion, added her own perspective from years of friendship with Esperanza. She became increasingly convinced during these last few years that she had finally located the burial site. She was actually planning a proper archaeological excavation in partnership with the State Historical Society, but her health declined before she could make those arrangements. This information provided Isabella with a potential path forward that would address both the practical challenges of excavation and the ethical considerations of handling historically significant artifacts. Professional archaeological involvement would ensure proper documentation and preservation while potentially validating the discovery's authenticity and value. Would the Historical Society still be interested in conducting a proper excavation? Isabella asked, thinking about the legal and logistical complexities involved in such an undertaking. "Most certainly," Professor Whitmore replied with evident enthusiasm. "In fact, I've maintained those academic connections specifically because of our ongoing research. The Georgia Historical Society has an archaeological team that specializes in Civil War sites. They could provide the expertise and equipment necessary for a proper recovery operation with full documentation and preservation protocols. What about legal ownership? Isabella asked, her practical concerns reflecting both her military training in following proper procedures and her personal need for financial security. Georgia state law is quite clear on this matter, the professor explained with the confidence of someone who had researched the legal questions thoroughly. As the property owner, any artifacts discovered on your land would legally belong to you. The Historical Society would request the opportunity to document, possibly display items of particular historical significance, but ownership and control remain with the property holder. The professor opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. Esperanza was quite thorough in researching these legal questions before proceeding with her investigation. These documents outlined the relevant state statutes, precedent cases, and proper procedures for handling significant historical discoveries. The conversation continued as they walked back toward the main house, with Professor Whitmore providing valuable context about the historical significance of Confederate Treasury materials and the academic interest that would surround any confirmed discovery. His extensive knowledge and obvious passion for historical accuracy reminded Isabella of Catherine's earlier descriptions of Esperanza's methodical approach to research. Over lunch prepared by Catherine, who seemed to have appointed herself Isabella's unofficial community integration coordinator, they discussed the practical next steps for investigating the site beneath the pecan tree. Professor Whitmore offered to contact the Georgia Historical Society to arrange for an archaeological assessment, while Catherine provided insights about local resources that might support such a project. Esperanza would be pleased to see her. Research continued with proper academic oversight, Professor Whitmore commented as they concluded their meal. She always intended for this discovery to benefit you personally, Isabella, but she also felt a strong responsibility to ensure that any historical materials were properly documented for future generations. The professor's words reinforced what Isabella had been learning about her great-aunt, that far from being a distant, Esperanza had been thoughtfully preparing a comprehensive support system designed specifically for Isabella's needs while also honoring her responsibilities as a historical researcher. There's something else you should know, Professor Whitmore continued, his expression becoming more personal. Esperanza spoke about you quite often during our research sessions, especially after she learned the professor's academic credentials and long association with Esperanza lent additional credibility to the historical research, suggesting that the potential discovery might indeed be significant rather than merely wishful thinking or family legend. Do you believe there's actually Confederate gold buried here? Isabella asked directly, gesturing toward the pecan tree where she had been working. The documentary evidence is quite compelling, Professor Whitmore replied carefully, his academic training evident in his measured response. Historical records from the Confederate Treasury Department confirm that a significant shipment, approximately 400 pounds of gold coins and bullion, was diverted from the main Confederate Treasury evacuation during Sherman's 1864 march toward Savannah. Colonel Miguel Santos appears in military dispatches as being charged with securing these assets, and his family's private correspondence mentions Casa Esperanza as a secure location. The professor paused, consulting a leather portfolio he had brought with him. Esperanza and I spent years methodically eliminating every other possible location mentioned in Santos' family documents. This property represents the only remaining site that matches the geographical and historical descriptions in the original correspondence. Catherine, who had been listening quietly to this historical discussion, added her own perspective from years of friendship with Esperanza. She became increasingly convinced during these last few years that she had finally located the burial site. She was actually planning a proper archaeological excavation in partnership with the State Historical Society, but her health declined before she could make those arrangements. This information provided Isabella with a potential path forward that would address both the practical challenges of excavation and the ethical considerations of handling historically significant artifacts. Professional archaeological involvement would ensure proper documentation and preservation while potentially validating the discovery's authenticity and value. Would the Historical Society still be interested in conducting a proper excavation? Isabella asked, thinking about the legal and logistical complexities involved in such an undertaking. Most certainly, Professor Whitmore replied with evident enthusiasm. In fact, I've maintained those academic connections specifically because of our ongoing research. The Georgia Historical Society has an archaeological team that specializes in Civil War sites. They could provide the expertise and equipment necessary for a proper recovery operation with full documentation and preservation protocols. What about legal ownership? Isabella asked, her practical concerns reflecting both her military training in following proper procedures and her personal need for financial security. Georgia state law is quite clear on this matter, the professor explained with the confidence of someone who had researched the legal questions thoroughly. As the property owner, any artifacts discovered on your land would legally belong to you. The Historical Society would request the opportunity to document, possibly display items of particular historical significance, but ownership and control remain with the property holder. The professor opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. Esperanza was quite thorough in researching these legal questions before proceeding with her investigation. These documents outlined the relevant state statutes, precedent cases, and proper procedures for handling significant historical discoveries. The conversation continued as they walked back toward the main house, with Professor Whitmore providing valuable context about the historical significance of Confederate treasury materials and the academic interest that would surround any confirmed discovery. His extensive knowledge and obvious passion for historical accuracy. I'm planning to study agricultural engineering at the University of Georgia, Carlos mentioned, as they discussed farming innovations. I'd like to help family operations like ours adopt new technologies that improve both productivity and environmental sustainability. The conversation with the Henderson family provided Isabella with a practical understanding of her property's agricultural potential, while also demonstrating the kind of community connections that could support both her recovery and her long-term stability. The lease arrangement provided immediate income while allowing her time to develop her own plans for the property's future. As evening approached, Isabella found herself on the main house's veranda, with Luna beside her, watching the sun set behind the Georgia pines and reflecting on the remarkable discoveries and connections she had experienced in just her second day à Casa Esperanza. The metal detector readings had confirmed Esperanza's research about buried materials beneath the pecan tree. Professor Whitmore's academic expertise had provided credible historical context for what might be a genuinely significant discovery. The Henderson family had demonstrated that the property could generate sustainable income through agricultural operations. Catherine had established herself as a reliable guide to community resources and local culture. Most importantly, Isabella was beginning to experience something she hadn't felt since before her first deployment, a sense of belonging to a place and community, where her contributions would be valued and her recovery supported. The combination of historical mystery, practical opportunities, and genuine human connections was creating possibilities for a future that extended far beyond mere survival. That evening, as Isabella prepared for sleep in her comfortable new environment with Luna maintaining her protective position beside the bed, she found herself handling the silver locket that Esperanza had recovered and returned to her. The inscription's strength grows in hidden places seemed to take on new significance in light of everything she had learned about her great-aunt's careful preparations and genuine care. For the first time since her medical discharge, Isabella allowed herself to consider the possibility that her struggles with PTSD and financial insecurity might represent a temporary challenge rather than a permanent limitation. The inheritance had provided not just property and potential treasure, but something more valuable, a path toward healing and purpose that honored both her military service and her family heritage. 3 weeks after Isabella's arrival at Casa Esperanza, the Georgia Historical Society's archaeological team assembled on the plantation with the precision of a well-coordinated military operation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Society's lead archaeologist specializing in Civil War sites, had brought a team of 6 specialists, along with equipment that transformed the area around the ancient pecan tree into what resembled an outdoor laboratory. Isabella watched from the main house veranda as the team deployed ground-penetrating radar, advanced metal detection systems, and soil analysis equipment around the massive tree. Luna lay beside her chair, content to observe the activity while staying close to her new companion. The professional validation of Esperanza's research felt both exciting and slightly surreal. 3 weeks ago, Isabella had been facing eviction from a cramped Charlotte apartment, and now she was overseeing what might be the most significant Civil War archaeological discovery in Georgia. The preliminary scans confirm your great-aunt's findings exactly, Dr. Vasquez reported as she joined Isabella on the veranda after the initial survey work. We're detecting a large metallic object at 4.2 feet depth, dimensions consistent with a Civil War-era military transport chest. The preservation appears remarkable, likely due to the stable soil conditions and protection provided by the tree's root system. The scientific confirmation of Esperanza's decades of research brought a complex mixture of emotions to Isabella: validation of her great-aunt's meticulous work, excitement about the potential discovery, and gratitude for the thorough preparation that had made this moment possible. "What happens next?" Isabella asked, her military training inclining her toward understanding clear operational procedures and timelines. "We'll begin the excavation tomorrow morning," Dr. Vasquez explained. "The location beneath the root system requires particular care. We've consulted with arborists to ensure no damage to the tree, and we'll proceed slowly to preserve both the historical integrity of any artifacts and the site's archaeological context." Professor Whitmore had driven down from Savannah to observe the excavation, bringing with him additional historical documentation that provided context for what they might discover. His presence lent academic weight to the proceedings while ensuring that proper scholarly protocols would be followed. "I've been researching Colonel Santos's correspondence more thoroughly," he told Isabella as they reviewed the historical background. "The family letters suggest this wasn't just random treasure burial, but part of a coordinated effort to preserve Confederate assets for post-war reconstruction that never materialized. If authentic, this could represent one of the largest undiscovered Confederate treasury caches." The excavation began at dawn the following day, with the archaeological team working in careful stages to expose the buried object, without disturbing either the pecan tree's root system or the historical context of the site. Isabella found herself fascinated by the scientific methodology. Each layer of soil was photographed, measured, and cataloged before removal, creating a comprehensive record of exactly how the materials had been buried and preserved. By mid-afternoon, the team had exposed enough of the buried object to confirm it was indeed a Confederate military transport chest. Its iron construction and brass fittings remarkably preserved after 160 years underground. The chest measured approximately 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep, substantial enough to contain significant materials, while still being portable by a small group of men. "The preservation is extraordinary," Dr. Vasquez commented as they carefully cleaned soil from around the chest's edges. "The lid appears to be intact, and the lock mechanism, while corroded, seems functional. We should be able to open it using period-appropriate techniques rather than cutting tools." The careful excavation took most of 2 days, with each stage documented through photography, measurements, and detailed notes that would provide permanent record of the discovery regardless of what the chest might contain. Isabella appreciated the thorough approach, which honored both the historical significance and her great-aunt's methodical research style. When the chest was finally lifted from its resting place beneath the pecan tree, it required 4 team members to manage its weight safely. The moment when it cleared the excavation site drew a collective intake of breath from the assembled observers, the physical manifestation of historical documentation that had existed only in family letters and Confederate military records. "We'll transport it to our conservation facility at the college for proper opening," Dr. Vasquez informed Isabella. "The contents have remained sealed for 160 years. So we need controlled environmental conditions to prevent deterioration when the chest is opened." The transportation to Savannah proceeded with careful planning reminiscent of military logistics operations. The chest, now encased in a custom stabilization container, was loaded into a climate-controlled vehicle with police escort to ensure security. Isabella followed in her own car, with Luna riding beside her, accompanied by Professor Whitmore, who provided historical context during the journey. This represents a significant discovery regardless of the contents, the professor emphasized as they drove through the Georgia countryside. The confirmation of this aspect of Confederate Treasury operations adds an important chapter to our understanding of Civil War, economic measures, and post-war planning. The conservation laboratory at Savannah College of Art and Design resembled a cross between a medical facility and a high-tech research center. Staff members wearing specialized protective clothing worked in an environment where temperature, humidity, and air quality were precisely controlled to protect fragile historical artifacts from deterioration. Dr. Maria Santos, the lead conservator, whose surname provided an interesting coincidence given the historical connection, greeted them with professional courtesy while establishing clear protocols for the examination process. "We'll begin with non-invasive assessment," Dr. Santos explained. X-ray imaging, spectroscopic analysis, and detailed external documentation will help us determine the safest approach for opening the chest without damaging either the container or its contents. The preliminary examination confirmed what Esperanza's research had suggested. X-ray imaging revealed the chest contained dense materials arranged in organized layers, suggesting intentional packing rather than hasty burial. The contents appeared to be primarily metallic objects of uniform size and shape, consistent with coins or small bullion pieces. The lock mechanism appears to be intact and potentially functional, Dr. Santos reported after completing the external analysis. "We should be able to open the chest using conservation techniques that preserve the historical integrity of both container and contents." The actual opening was scheduled for the following morning, allowing time for proper preparation and ensuring that appropriate documentation equipment would be ready. Isabella spent a restless night in a Savannah hotel, her mind racing between excitement about the potential discovery and anxiety about managing such a dramatic change in her circumstances. The next morning brought representatives from the Georgia Historical Society, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and the State Attorney General's office to witness the official opening. Their presence underscored the potential significance of the discovery while ensuring that proper legal and academic protocols would be followed. "We're ready to proceed," Dr. Santos announced to the small group of authorized observers. "Based on our analysis, the contents appear to be well preserved, but we should prepare for some deterioration due to environmental exposure once the seal is broken." The opening of the chest occurred with surprising ease after the careful preparation. The corroded lock mechanism yielded to the conservator's specialized tools, and the heavy iron lid was slowly raised to reveal contents that had remained hidden since April 1863. The collective gasp from the observers confirmed what the initial glimpse revealed. The chest contained neatly arranged layers of gold coins, each row separated by what had once been protective fabric that had largely disintegrated but had served its purpose in preventing damage. During transportation and burial, preliminary assessment suggests these are authentic Confederate gold coins. Dr. Santos stated, her professional composure barely containing obvious excitement. "The preservation is remarkable. Many appear to be in uncirculated condition, despite their age." As the conservation team began the meticulous process of documenting and cataloging each coin, Professor Whitmore provided historical context for the assembled observers. "Based on our research, this appears to be a portion of the Treasury shipment diverted from Atlanta during Sherman's march toward the coast. Colonel Santos was instructed to secure these assets with the intention of retrieving them when Confederate forces could regain control of Georgia. The preliminary inventory revealed approximately 380 pounds of gold coins in denominations, ranging from $2.50 quarter eagles to $20 double eagles, most minted in Charlotte, Dahlonega, or New Orleans during the early 1860s. The historical significance of the collection was matched by its remarkable preservation, with many coins showing minimal wear despite their century and a half underground. A conservative estimate would place the bullion value at approximately $12 million at current gold prices. The college's numismatic consultant reported after completing an initial assessment, "However, The historical premium on Confederate era gold coins in this condition, particularly those with documented provenance, would multiply that value significantly. We're likely looking at a total collection worth between $28 to $32 million, depending on how it's eventually handled. A staggering figure momentarily left Isabella speechless. The amount represented not just financial security, but generational wealth. A transformation so complete from her recent circumstances that it seemed almost fictional in its magnitude. Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Vasquez approached her as the documentation continued. I want to personally commend your great-aunt's research methodology and your decision to pursue proper archaeological recovery. Many discoveries of this nature are lost to history through improper excavation or immediate private sale. Your approach ensures both your financial benefit and the advancement of historical knowledge.
Oh.
The acknowledgement helped Isabella focus on the broader significance of the discovery beyond its personal financial impact. Esperanza had pursued this research with scientific integrity rather than treasure-hunting greed. And honoring that approach felt increasingly important as the magnitude of the find became clear. As the documentation process continued over the following days, Isabella found herself navigating complex new territories, insurance requirements, security concerns, authentication procedures, and investment considerations that would have seemed utterly foreign just a month earlier. Through it all, she maintained her therapy sessions with Dr. Chen at the Savannah Veterans Medical Center, who provided crucial support as she processed the dramatic changes in her circumstances. Sudden wealth can be psychologically challenging. As sudden loss, Dr. Chen observed during one of their sessions, you're experiencing a form of adjustment disorder that requires the same careful attention as your PTSD recovery. The key is maintaining connection to your values and sense of purpose, rather than being overwhelmed by the financial implications. The wisdom of this perspective became increasingly apparent as Isabella fielded calls from distant relatives who had suddenly remembered their connection to the Rodriguez family, financial advisors eager to manage her newfound wealth, and media outlets seeking exclusive coverage of the Confederate gold discovery. Professor Whitmore proved invaluable in managing the historical and academic aspects of the discovery, serving as intermediary with museums and educational institutions interested in studying or displaying portions of the collection. His deep knowledge of Civil War history and artifact preservation helped Isabella navigate decisions that would affect both her financial interests and the historical record. Esperanza always envisioned a balanced approach if this discovery proved successful. The professor explained during one of their planning sessions, she believed the financial benefit should secure your future, but that the historical significance belonged to the broader community. She drafted several proposals for how this might work. Those proposals, found among Esperanza's meticulous files, outlined a thoughtful framework that would preserve Isabella's financial security while honoring the historical significance of the discovery. The plan involved donating representative samples to key museums, funding educational programs about Civil War economic history, and establishing a foundation that would support both historical research and veteran services. She thought of everything, Isabella remarked, reviewing the detailed plans that seemed to anticipate every legal, financial, and ethical consideration. It's like she wrote an operations manual for what to do after the discovery was made. 6 months after the initial excavation, Isabella stood in the newly completed Rodriguez Veterans Agricultural Training Center, watching as the first class of transitioning service members learned sustainable farming techniques on the expanded Casa Esperanza property. Luna, though showing her age, continued to serve as a therapy animal for program participants while maintaining her special bond with Isabella. The center represented the fulfillment of a vision that had evolved from Esperanza's initial preparations into something more comprehensive than either of them could have imagined alone. The Confederate gold discovery had provided the financial resources, but the true transformation had come through purposeful application of those resources toward meaningful community impact. The fall harvest numbers look excellent, reported Dr. James Chen, Center's agricultural director and Isabella's romantic partner, whose relationship had developed naturally over the past 4 months through their shared commitment to the program's mission. The organic certification is complete, and we have contracts with 12 Savannah restaurants for our specialty produce. The conversation took place in Isabella's office, which occupied the same space where Esperanza had conducted her historical research. The room now served dual purposes, preserving displays of Civil War artifacts alongside modern agricultural, planning materials, and veteran services resources. The residential program is at full capacity, added Dr. Sarah Chen from the Veterans Medical Center, who now served as the center's mental health director. We have a waiting list of 47 veterans interested in the next session, and similar programs are being established in 3 other states based on our model. The center's approach integrated evidence-based PTSD treatment with practical agricultural training, creating a therapeutic environment that addressed both psychological recovery and vocational reintegration. The success rates had attracted national attention from veterans organizations and agricultural institutions interested in replicating the program. Isabella walked through the training facilities with Luna beside her, observing program participants working with heritage livestock, managing organic vegetable production, and learning modern farming technologies that could support rural careers. The combination of meaningful work, community connection, professional mental health support was creating transformation stories similar to her own experience. "I never imagined this kind of change was possible," commented Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a program participant who had arrived 3 months earlier with severe combat-related PTSD. "6 months ago, I was living in my car and couldn't hold a job for more than a few weeks. Now I'm planning to start my own sustainable farm operation when I complete the program." The authentic testimonials from program participants reminded Isabella daily that the true value of the Confederate gold discovery extended far beyond personal financial security. The treasure had provided resources, but the meaningful impact came through creating opportunities for other veterans to find their own paths toward healing and purpose. That evening, Isabella and James walked through Esperanza's restored gardens, now expanded to include educational plantings that demonstrated sustainable agriculture techniques to program participants and community visitors. The ancient pecan tree, now marked with a discreet historical plaque, continued to stand guard over the spot where Confederate gold had waited. 160 years to transform lives in ways its original owners could never have anticipated. The museum exhibition opens next month, James mentioned as they paused beside the tree. Professor Whitmore says it's generating interest from Civil War historians across the Southeast. The traveling exhibition, featuring representative coins from the collection, along with the story of the discovery and its impact on veteran services, had become an educational tool that connected historical preservation with contemporary social issues. Visitors learned about Civil War economic measures while also discovering how historical discoveries could fund modern community programs. Esperanza would be amazed at what her research eventually created, Isabella reflected, thinking about how her great-aunt's careful historical work had led to outcomes far beyond the original treasure hunt. She was looking for Confederate gold, but she found a way to transform lives across generations. James smiled at the observation. The best discoveries often create value that multiplies over time rather than diminishing through use. What you've built here doesn't just spend wealth, it creates ongoing impact through each person who finds their path forward. As they returned to the main house, Isabella paused on the veranda where she had first met Catherine and Professor Whitmore. Now both integral parts of the center's advisory board, the transformation from struggling veteran to community leader had required not just the financial resources provided by the gold discovery, but also the support network that Esperanza had carefully constructed and the sense of purpose that came from serving others, facing similar challenges. 3 years after inheriting Casa Esperanza, Isabella had discovered that her great-aunt's greatest gift wasn't the $30 million in Confederate gold buried beneath the pecan tree. The real treasure had been the opportunity to transform personal struggle into community healing, individual recovery into collective resilience, an historical legacy into future possibility. The Rodriguez Veterans Agricultural Training Center, now operated as a permanent institution with sustainable funding from the gold discovery's investment returns. Similar programs were being established across the country, creating a network of rural recovery centers that honored both military service and agricultural heritage, while addressing the ongoing challenges faced by veterans transitioning to civilian life. Isabella's own PTSD remained a managed condition rather than a cured one. But the symptoms had diminished dramatically through the combination of appropriate treatment, meaningful work, and supportive community that Esperanza had envisioned. The hypervigilance that had once dominated her existence had been rechanneled into attentive program management. While her military leadership skills found natural application in developing the center's services, that night, as Isabella prepared for sleep in the master bedroom that had become truly home, she placed the silver locket on her bedside table, a ritual she had maintained since returning to Casa Esperanza. The inscription's "Strength grows in hidden places" had proven prophetic in ways that extended far beyond the buried Confederate gold. What Isabella had discovered beneath that ancient pecan tree wasn't just $30 million in historical treasure. She had uncovered the capacity to transform trauma into triumph, isolation into community leadership, and personal recovery, into a legacy of service that would continue long after the gold coins had been spent or invested. The compass of her life now pointed not toward mere survival, but toward a true north of purpose, healing, and contribution that honored both her military service and her family heritage. The treasure had always been there, waiting beneath the surface, not just in the Confederate chest, but in the strength, resilience, and capacity for service that had survived combat, PTSD, and financial desperation to emerge as sources of healing for others walking similar paths. 3 years after that remarkable discovery, Isabella Rodriguez stood not just as the beneficiary of an extraordinary inheritance, but as the architect of a new kind of treasure, one that grew more valuable with each life it touched, each veteran it helped heal, and each family it brought back together. The Confederate gold had provided the means, but the true wealth lay in the transformation of suffering into service, creating a legacy that would endure long after the last coin had found its purpose. 5 years after the Confederate gold discovery, Isabella Rodriguez stood before the United States Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C., her hands steady as she prepared to deliver testimony that could reshape how America supports its transitioning service members. The mahogany-paneled hearing room buzzed with quiet conversations between senators, policy advisors, and representatives from various veterans organizations who had gathered to hear about the Rodriguez model, a comprehensive approach to veteran reintegration that had achieved unprecedented success rates. Ms. Rodriguez, Senator Patricia Williams of California, began. Your agricultural therapy programs now operate in 14 states and have served over 800 veterans. Can you explain to the committee what makes this approach more effective than traditional rehabilitation methods? Isabella adjusted the microphone, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had transformed personal struggle into national policy influence. Senator Williams, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. The Rodriguez model succeeds because it treats veterans as capable individuals who need purpose and community, not as broken people who need fixing. We combine evidence-based PTSD treatment with meaningful agricultural work, sustainable housing, and peer support networks that address the whole person, not just their symptoms. The hearing represented the culmination of a remarkable journey that had begun with Isabella's the desperate inheritance of Casa Esperanza, and evolved into a movement that was changing how America understood veteran care. Behind her in the gallery sat James Chen, now her husband of 2 years, along with Luna, now an elderly but still dignified therapy dog who had become something of a mascot for agricultural therapy programs nationwide. Senator Robert Hayes of Texas leaned forward, consulting his notes. The Department of Veterans Affairs reports that your program participants have a 89% employment rate 1 year post-completion, compared to 54% for traditional programs. They also show a 76% reduction in PTSD symptom severity and a 68% decrease in substance abuse issues. How do you account for these dramatic improvements? Senator Hayes: the key is addressing the root causes of veteran reintegration challenges rather than just managing symptoms. Isabella replied, drawing from years of experience refining their approach. Many veterans struggle not because they're permanently damaged, but because civilian life lacks the structure, purpose, and camaraderie that military service provided. Our programs recreate those elements in a healing environment. She paused, allowing her personal experience to inform her professional expertise. When I inherited my great-aunt's plantation, I was homeless, facing bankruptcy, and barely managing severe PTSD. What saved me wasn't just therapy or medication, though. Those were essential. It was finding meaningful work that connected my military skills to civilian purposes within a community that understood service and sacrifice. She paused, allowing her personal experience to inform her professional expertise. When I inherited my great-aunt's plantation, I was homeless, facing bankruptcy, and barely managing severe PTSD. What saved me wasn't just therapy or medication. Though those were essential, it was finding meaningful work that connected my military skills to civilian purposes within a community that understood service and sacrifice. The senators listened intently as Isabella outlined the comprehensive nature of the Rodriguez model. Participants lived in restored historical buildings on working farms, learning sustainable agriculture while receiving specialized mental health care. They worked with heritage livestock breeds, managed organic vegetable operations, developed business skills through direct sales to restaurants and farmers markets. The agricultural component serves multiple therapeutic functions, Isabella explained. Working with soil and growing things provides grounding for hypervigilant symptoms. Caring for animals develops empathy and routine. Managing crop cycles teaches patience and long-term planning. Most importantly, feeding communities gives veterans a sense of purpose that transcends their individual recovery. Senator Maria Santos, of New Mexico, whose surname provided an interesting echo of the Confederate colonel whose treasure had made everything possible, asked about the program's financial sustainability. Ms. Rodriguez, these comprehensive services must be expensive. How do you maintain quality while keeping costs manageable? The programs are largely self-sustaining through agricultural sales, educational tourism, and strategic partnerships. Isabella responded. Participants' work generates revenue that supports operations, while corporate sponsorships and foundation grants fund expansion. Established with proceeds from a historical discovery on my inherited property provides seed funding for new locations, but each site becomes financially independent within 3 years. The committee spent considerable time reviewing data that supported the program's effectiveness. Dr. Amanda Foster, VA psychiatrist who had studied the Rodriguez model extensively, presented research showing that participants maintained their improved mental health outcomes at significantly higher rates than those completing traditional programs. What we're seeing is genuine transformation rather than temporary symptom management, Dr. Foster testified. Participants develop sustainable coping mechanisms, meaningful career skills, and social connections that support long-term recovery. The agricultural setting provides natural therapy that complements clinical interventions in ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically. The hearing also included testimony from program graduates who had gone on to establish their own farms, pursue agricultural careers, or start veteran-focused businesses. Their stories demonstrated the ripple effects of effective recovery programs, not just healing individual veterans, but strengthening rural communities and contributing to sustainable agriculture movements. Master Sergeant retired Kevin Washington, a Marine veteran who had completed the Georgia program 2 years earlier, addressed the committee with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to military briefings. Senators, I arrived at Casa Esperanza after 3 failed suicide attempts and 8 years of unemployment despite my military logistics experience. Today, I manage a 200-acre organic farm in North Carolina that employs 6 other veterans and supplies produce 243 restaurants across the region. His testimony was followed by Specialist Sarah Kim, an Army veteran whose PTSD had been compounded by military sexual trauma. The Rodriguez model saved my life not through pity or charity, but by recognizing that my military skills, leadership, logistics, problem-solving under pressure, were assets that could be redirected toward civilian success. I now operate a sustainable agriculture consulting business that helps family farms transition to organic methods. Following the Senate hearing, Isabella found herself at the center of policy discussions that could fundamentally change how America supported its transitioning veterans. The Rodriguez model had attracted bipartisan support because it achieved measurable results while reducing long-term costs to taxpayers. Over lunch with congressional staff members, Isabella learned that the Department of Agriculture and Department of Veterans Affairs were developing a joint initiative based on her programs. The proposed legislation would provide grants for establishing agricultural therapy centers on unused federal land, creating a nationwide network of recovery facilities that combine veteran services with sustainable farming. The beauty of your approach, explained Jennifer Martinez, a senior policy advisor, is that it addresses multiple national priorities simultaneously: veteran care, rural economic development, sustainable agriculture, and food security. It's rare to find solutions that create value across so many areas. The conversation highlighted how Isabella's personal journey from struggling veteran to policy influencer had created opportunities for systemic change. The Confederate gold discovery had provided initial. She paused, allowing her personal experience to inform her professional expertise. When I inherited my great-aunt's plantation, I was homeless, facing bankruptcy, and barely managing severe PTSD. What saved me wasn't just therapy or medication. Though those were essential, it was finding meaningful work that connected my military skills to civilian purposes, within a community that understood service and sacrifice. The senators listened intently as Isabella outlined the comprehensive nature of the Rodriguez model. Participants lived in restored historical buildings on working farms, learning sustainable agriculture while receiving specialized mental health care. They worked with heritage livestock breeds, managed organic vegetable operations, developed business skills through direct sales to restaurants and farmers markets. The agricultural component serves multiple therapeutic functions, Isabella explained. Working with soil and growing things provides grounding for hypervigilant symptoms. Caring for animals develops empathy and routine. Managing crop cycles teaches patience and long-term planning. Most importantly, feeding communities gives veterans a sense of purpose that transcends their individual recovery. Senator Maria Santos, of New Mexico, whose surname provided an interesting echo of the Confederate colonel whose treasure had made everything possible, asked about the program's financial sustainability. Ms. Rodriguez, these comprehensive services must be expensive. How do you maintain quality while keeping costs manageable? The programs are largely self-sustaining through agricultural sales, educational tourism, and strategic partnerships. Isabella responded. Participants' work generates revenue that supports operations, while corporate sponsorships and foundation grants fund expansion. Established with proceeds from a historical discovery on my inherited property provides seed funding for new locations, but each site becomes financially independent within 3 years. The committee spent considerable time reviewing data that supported the program's effectiveness. Dr. Amanda Foster, VA psychiatrist who had studied the Rodriguez model extensively, presented research showing that participants maintained their improved mental health outcomes at significantly higher rates than those completing traditional programs. What we're seeing is genuine transformation rather than temporary symptom management, Dr. Foster testified. Participants develop sustainable coping mechanisms, meaningful career skills, and social connections that support long-term recovery. The agricultural setting provides natural therapy that complements clinical interventions in ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically. The hearing also included testimony from program graduates who had gone on to establish their own farms, pursue agricultural careers, or start veteran-focused businesses. Their stories demonstrated the ripple effects of effective recovery programs, not just healing individual veterans, but strengthening rural communities and contributing to sustainable agriculture movements. Master Sergeant retired Kevin Washington, a Marine veteran who had completed the Georgia program 2 years earlier, addressed the committee with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to military briefings. Senators, I arrived at CASA Esperanza after 3 failed suicide attempts and 8 years of unemployment despite my military logistics experience. Today, I manage a 200-acre organic farm in North Carolina that employs 6 other veterans and supplies produce 243 restaurants across the region. His testimony was followed by Specialist Sarah Kim, an Army veteran whose PTSD had been compounded by military sexual trauma. The Rodriguez model saved my life not through pity or charity, but by recognizing that my military skills, leadership, logistics, problem-solving under pressure were assets. We're finding that the combination of physical activity, exposure to natural environments, and meaningful productivity creates measurable changes in brain chemistry that support trauma recovery. Dr. Rodriguez explained to conference delegates, "The agricultural setting provides what we're calling therapeutic complexity. Multiple simultaneous interventions that work synergistically in ways that isolated treatments cannot replicate." His research was attracting attention from medical schools, agricultural colleges, veteran service organizations interested in understanding why the Rodriguez model achieves superior outcomes compared to traditional approaches. The scientific validation was helping overcome skepticism from medical professionals who had initially viewed agricultural therapy as unconventional or unproven. Meanwhile, Luna, now 10 years old and moving more slowly but still alert and engaged, has become the subject of her own research study on the long-term benefits of human-animal bonding for PTSD recovery. Dr. Catherine Mitchell, who had become one of the program's key advisors, was documenting Luna's therapeutic impact across multiple veteran participants over several years. Luna represents something unique in animal-assisted therapy, Dr. Mitchell explained to visiting researchers. She's not just a trained service dog working with one individual, but a community therapy animal whose consistent presence provides stability and comfort for hundreds of program participants over time. The elderly retriever had become something of a legend among program alumni, who returned regularly to visit and often brought their own rescue dogs that had been trained using techniques developed at Casa Esperanza, the multi-generational animal therapy program was creating bonds between veteran families and contributing to the overall sense of extended community that supported long-term recovery. As autumn arrived in Georgia, Isabella found herself preparing for what would be her most challenging and meaningful project yet. Establishing the Rodriguez model in inner-city environments where many veterans faced additional challenges related to urban poverty, limited access to land, and community violence. The Urban Agricultural Therapy Initiative, funded through a partnership with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, would adapt rural farming techniques to urban settings, using vertical growing systems, rooftop gardens, and converted warehouse spaces. The first pilot program was scheduled to open in Detroit, with additional locations planned for Cleveland, Phoenix, and Newark. Urban veterans face all the same reintegration challenges as rural veterans, plus additional barriers related to housing costs, transportation, and community violence, Isabella explained to the project planning committee. "We need to maintain our core principles while adapting our methods to environments where traditional farming isn't possible." The urban adaptation required innovative solutions that pushed the boundaries of both agriculture and therapy. Hydroponic systems could produce fresh vegetables in abandoned buildings. Rooftop apiaries could provide both therapy work and community food production. Indoor mushroom cultivation could generate income while creating meditative work environments. The Detroit pilot program would serve as a testing ground for these innovations. Working with local veterans organizations, urban agriculture advocates, and community development groups to create sustainable models that could be replicated in other cities. As Isabella stood in the planning meetings for the urban expansion, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from desperate homelessness to national leadership in veteran services. The path had been neither straight nor predictable, shaped by Esperanza's foresight, the Confederate treasure discovery, and countless individuals who had contributed their expertise, support, and trust. The 5 years since inheriting Casa Esperanza had demonstrated that personal transformation, when supported by adequate resources and guided by clear purpose, could create impacts that extended far beyond individual recovery. The agricultural Therapy movement now represented a genuine alternative to traditional veteran services. With measurable outcomes that were changing policy discussions at the highest levels of government, yet Isabella understood that the real measure of success wouldn't be found in statistics or policy changes, but in the individual stories of veterans who had discovered that their military service, rather than ending with discharge, could evolve into new forms of meaningful contribution to their communities and country. As she prepared for the challenges ahead, Isabella carried with her the lessons learned from 5 years of transforming struggle into service. That healing happens through purpose rather than pity, that recovery requires community rather than isolation, and that the greatest treasures are often buried beneath our deepest challenges, waiting for the courage and persistence to dig deep enough to find their true worth. The Confederate gold had provided the initial resources, but the real treasure had always been the capacity for service that had survived combat, trauma, and desperation to emerge as a source of healing for others walking similar paths. Treasure continued to grow with each veteran served, each community strengthened, and each new generation of service members would benefit from programs that honored both their sacrifice and their continuing capacity to contribute. The journey that had begun with a desperate inheritance in rural Georgia was now influencing veteran policy across the nation and around the world, proving that individual transformation, when properly supported and purposefully directed, could become a force for systemic change that honored service, while creating hope for countless others still finding their way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.